Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. Welcome to another Sunday afternoon Dhamma Talk. So the theme today is fearing to leave fear behind. So this is an important theme to me, and so I'll offer some reflections on this area, on the nature of fear and also identification and the quality of freedom, and also to explore this mysterious reason why do we not want to leave our fears, our anxieties, our difficulties behind us. Many years ago, when I was newly arrived at the monastery in Thailand, there I had known nothing about Buddhism before I showed up at the monastery there. It was all very new to me. But when I was introduced to the Buddha's teachings and the practice of meditation, it made really perfect sense to me. And it was this strange experience of feeling like there was so many things that I had already understood, but only partly, and things that I had sort of had ideas about, but weren't very clearly articulated. When I came across the Buddha's teachings, it was like all these various stray ideas and perceptions that I'd had all sort of joined together and filled out in extraordinary detail, and this feeling of, oh, I wasn't the first person to think these things. You know, the Buddha was there long before me, and besides, he's thought it all through 10,000 times better than I ever could. And not only that, but there's this whole system of the religion and the faith of the people in Thailand who are eager to support me to stay in this place and to say pursue these teachings and to develop this way of living. So there was in a strange way, a familiarity with the teachings. It all made a lot of sense to me, even though it was very, very new. And I felt a tremendous amount of inspiration and delight, and a feeling of, well, this is really definitely the way forward. This is exactly what I've been looking for, because through much of my life, from early teens or before my teens, I had struggled with the question of how we can be free. That there's this longing for freedom, the sense of, oh, I want to be free, I want to have a life which is unconfined, which is fully at ease, and where we can have that sense of being unlimited or unconfined in any way, but yet we keep meeting with limitation. We haven't got enough money to do the things that we want, or we have got physical limitations. We're not as strong as we want to be, or we don't have as much energy as we would like. We can't fly through the air. You know, the things that you desire, you can't get all of them. The people that you're attracted to, some of them are not attracted to you. The things that you want to get, you haven't got enough money for them, or the things that you want to do, there's laws against them, or your parents, or your school teachers, or the civil authorities say, no, you can't do that. Speed limits, parking laws and such like. So throughout my teens, it was this puzzle to me. How can we be free when we keep meeting with all these limitations, physical limitations, biological limitations, social limitations, one thing after another. And so, but underneath it, there was a sense of we can be free. I'm sure there's a way that we can be free, but how do we do that? Because it's not just a matter of you can see it's not just a matter of having more money or say trying to flout the laws of the country. So I was by the time I was a university student, I was hippie anarchist type, so I like to say flout the laws of the country and flout social conventions. But still, even though I tried to be free by defying those kind of social limitations, still I would meet with one boundary after another. I still didn't have enough money to do the things I wanted. I couldn't go the places I wanted to. The people that I was with, they didn't want to do the things that I did. There was, even no matter how hard you tried to ignore conventions or ignore the boundaries of the social world or the physical world, the psychological world, I kept meeting this sense of limitation. So this was very frustrating, and it seemed like the more that you tried to dismiss the rules and conventions of society, rather than making you freer, it tended to make you more anxious and more insecure and more uncomfortable, I found, anyway. And also the other sort of hippie anarchists that I hung out with were not particularly free people. Often their minds were very taken up with aggression or selfishness or following opinions or greedy impulses of one kind or another. So this had been a big conundrum for me for about 10 years, since I was about 11 years old till I was 21, trying to figure out how can we be free. So coming in contact with Buddha Dhamma at the age of 21 in northeast Thailand at Wat Pah Nanachat, then, and being introduced to meditation teachings and how the Buddha's teaching relates directly to desire and the nature of where freedom can genuinely be found. So this was just within the first couple of days I was there. I was introduced to meditation, and I saw that I'd really been looking in the wrong place. That I had assumed that when you want something, if you desire something, say if you're hungry and you want some food, then you either gratify your desire and you're happy for a time, or you don't gratify your desire and you're frustrated. So that even if you are able to fulfill that desire, it only makes you happy. It only makes you free and content, fulfilled temporarily. And so that how could it be that then every desire that you have you could gratify and you would feel satisfied all of the time? So that was the puzzle that had been perplexing me. So coming in contact with Buddhist teaching, and then being pointed out to me, well, the attention's going in the wrong direction. You should look at the nature of desire. Why do you believe that when the mind says, I've got to have this, or I need that, or I want to go there, if I can go there, that's a good thing? Why do we believe that? So the Buddha's teaching trains us to look directly at desire and to challenge that. And as I've mentioned in many Dhamma talks in the past, the initial instruction I got was from an Australian anagarika. I was a layperson, and he was the one looking after guests. And so I hear his voice with his Australian accent. His name was Peter Hazel. He passed away a couple of years ago. But I can hear his voice saying, "Desire is a liar." Not a lawyer, a liar. Desire is a liar. And so I said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, when you say when the mind says I've got to have X or Y or Z, it's a lie. It's not true. But because we believe that, then we get carried along by that impulse. So I thought, well, that sounds like rubbish. Doesn't make sense. But then in the very first meditation that I did at the monastery, then a few minutes in, before my legs started hurting too much, and because I'd only just discovered that they don't have food in the afternoon or the evening in the monastery, I felt hungry. I thought, oh, I'd like something to eat. And then I thought, oh, this is one of those desires he was talking about. I'm really hungry. I'd like something to eat. And I said, well, okay, here's the desire. I want something to eat. I haven't got something to eat. I'm recognizing the desire. So I'm still hungry. So what? This Buddhism is stupid. That was my first impression. Then, about 5 minutes later, after many other distractions, I suddenly realized, oh, that feeling of being hungry has changed. I don't feel hungry. And then it hit me. I didn't get the food, but nothing is missing. Right? That was So what I was thinking at that moment, I'd really like a piece of pineapple, was the thing that I thought of, because I was on a very low budget when I was living in Thailand, so pineapple was kind of all I could afford a lot of the time. So that moment, so 5 minutes after that first recognition of the desire, I realized I didn't get the pineapple, but nothing is missing. Oh, so he's right. It was lying. The desire was lying. So the desire said, I've got to have this, or I won't be happy. And then I realized I didn't get the pineapple, and nothing is missing. And even though it might not sound like much, at that moment, that was like this huge sort of gravitational shift in my perception of the world. It's like, oh, that's how you deal with desire. That's how freedom can be found. It's in understanding desire, understanding that feeling of lack, and not just being pulled around by that. So this is by way of a preamble. So then having had that, I mean, I was still a confused 21-year-old, and definitely not claiming any kind of great enlightenment experience. But that change of perspective made a huge, huge difference. So I found myself extremely happy and delighted to be in this environment and this very lovely community. And so it was a very joyful time for me, and I felt like I really had a pathway forward that could lead towards freedom at last. So during that time, around about that same time, I had a very vivid dream. And in this dream, for some reason, I was a member of a Native American tribe. I have no idea why, but I was. It was a sort of cowboys and Indians movie scenario. And myself and the other members of this tribe were approaching this fortress, this wooden stockade. And the other members of the tribe had been imprisoned inside. So the idea is we were attacking this place to liberate our friends who were locked up. So there was no aspect of a battle in the dream, but I sort of arrived at the point where the battle had been won and the gates of the stockade of this wooden fortress were open. So we go sort of charging in to the open gate, and then I go down this corridor of cells where the people had been locked up, and I come to this cell where this old school friend, one of my closest school friends, had been imprisoned, and I can throw the door open, and I see him sitting there in the cell, and I say, "You're free. We won the battle. You're free." And so this friend of mine and I spent many drunken nights together, attempting to be free through drugs and alcohol, sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and had spent many hours in each other's company. And so, for some reason, he sort of appeared in the dream in this particular role. So I went into the cell and said, "You're free. You can go. We won the battle." But he was sitting on the floor, and he was facing the corner of the room. And he kind of glanced briefly over his shoulder and then went back to doing something busily with his hands. And I thought, that's funny. And I kind of walked up closer to him and I said, "You're free, you can go." And he kind of looked again, so in a slightly agitated way. "Well, I'm kind of busy at the moment." And I thought, busy? How can he be busy? He's been locked up, he's been captured, and now, we've won the battle and he's liberated. He can go. And so, but he plainly wanted to carry on with what he was doing, and I went up and looked over his shoulder, and he was knitting, like with knitting needles and wool, which is not something I'd ever seen him do ever before. But for some reason, I'm not making any casting any aspersions on knitters. It was just in the logic of the dream. It was something that is not generally considered to be an unavoidable duty, right? Even the most accomplished knitters can put the knitting aside and do something else for a time. So there he was sitting in the corner of the cell knitting. He said, "I'm sorry, I'm kind of busy at the moment." I said, "Well, you're free. We can go. We won the fight. The door's open." And he was very intent on focusing on his knitting. And then I thought, well, okay, we'll leave him to it. I'm off. So I turned around and left the cell, and then I woke up. So it was one of those very vivid, clear dreams that had a consistent logic all the way through it, and it was clear there was a kind of message there. And so it was at that time, it was something that gave me a lot of confidence, both in the sort of him as an example of my former way of life of trying to be free through just getting wasted, through alcohol and drugs and partying, and sort of that kind of a hedonistic kind of freedom that hadn't really led to any kind of genuine freedom, and that and for some reason, when the genuine possibility of freedom was presented, there was something in that mindset that said, thanks but no thanks. I'm not interested. So it was a way that my mind was presenting this contrast of what I had discovered I was feeling. This is my interpretation of it. What I had discovered in the monastery as the path that the Buddha laid out towards freedom, and the path that I had been pursuing in the past, and that, but a lot of that worldly perspective, it seemed to be there was a fear of freedom, that better to be busy with my knitting than to be tied up with this little task than taking the opportunity of the open door and to being able to wander freely. So because it was such a vivid dream, and afterwards I thought, well, what was that about? Or why is that? And I realized, and over time I realized, well, it was speaking a lot about this fear of freedom, and how that sometimes we choose to stay anxious, to stay busy, to stay occupied, even when it's something. And again, I'm not maligning knitting as a inferior activity, but it is something that you can usually be put aside for more significant concerns. So but we can busy ourselves with all kinds of things just so that we'll feel like we're somebody doing something, and by taking refuge in that kind of a self-centered activity, or a worry, or a plan, or a regret. That the mind, locks onto that, and that becomes its refuge. Just like in the dream, there's the mind that prefers to stay stuck in its corner of a prison cell, being busy, rather than taking the opportunity of the open door and freedom itself. Now, when I was a student of psychology, before I'd gone to the monastery, one of the people that we had studied was a German psychologist called Erich Fromm, who, after the Nazi takeover in Germany, he moved to America and carried on his work there. And one of his books, I think one of his very earliest books, was called The Fear of Freedom. And it was about exactly this kind of area, so that as I reflected on that dream, I thought, oh, this is what this is talking about, that Erich Fromm had the same kind of perspective. So I thought through the wonders of Wikipedia, the great oracle of our age, I was able to track down this particular statement from Erich Fromm in the Fear of Freedom. The American edition is called Escape from Freedom. The British edition is called Fear of Freedom, but it's the same book, just in case you want to look it up yourself. He says, there is only one possible productive solution for the relationship of individualized man with the world: his active solidarity with all men and his spontaneous activity, love and work, which unite him again with the world, not by primary ties, but as a free and independent individual. However, if the economic, social and political conditions do not offer a basis for the realization of individuality in the sense just mentioned, while at the same time people have lost those ties which gave them security, this lag makes freedom an unbearable burden. It then becomes identical with doubt, with a kind of life which lacks meaning and direction. Powerful tendencies arise to escape from this kind of freedom into submission or some kind of relationship to man and the world which promises relief from uncertainty, even if it deprives the individual of his freedom. So it's so excuse all the masculine pronouns there. This is written in the 1950s, I believe, 1941. So it's an old text. But what it's saying is that we all have a longing for freedom, an intuition that freedom is possible. But if our living situation, as he says, the economic, social, and political conditions don't offer a basis, don't provide a situation where we can act in a free way, then what freedom that we have then becomes identical with a kind of doubt, and that and an insecurity, a life which lacks meaning and direction. We can't fulfill the things that we want. We haven't got enough things to make us feel content or happy, and so then freedom brings a terrible insecurity, a lack of meaning and direction. So then, what we end up doing is choosing a way of life, choosing to be connected to something. We hide in our corner of the cell, being busy with something, rather than choosing the freedom that is available to us. Does that make sense? And so that because the capacity to choose and to act doesn't really offer very many good options, then and it makes us feel insecure and discontent and life kind of meaningless and directionless, then we busy ourselves with something, just so that we'll feel like somebody, just so we'll feel as though there's something that I can do. I'm engaged with something that is significant. We shrink our world to that little corner and get busy with that, with our family, with our memories of the past, our worries about the people that we work with in the school or the college or the hospital or the monastery. We get obsessed with our little nook because it makes us feel like something. And again, when I was a student, there was and listening to all that, spending all those nights drinking and imbibing various substances. There was a particular musician, a man called Kevin Ayers, who had a number of albums that were very popular. And he was also a student of Gurdjieff, as well as being a rock and roll singer. And there was a couple of the verses from his songs that relate to this area. He wrote about this. And one particular passage, a couple of particular passages that I thought I'd share with you today, because again, during that time, my early days at Wat Pah Nanachat, this was very significant, where he said, talking about this process of attachment, he said, looking around madly for something to find that might give me a front to put something behind. Looking around madly for something to find that might give me a front to put something behind. Like finding something to be pushing against so that I'll feel like there's somebody here who's doing some pushing. Anything will do. A problem, a hope, a plan, a regret, an achievement, an enemy, something, anything. That we look around madly for something to find, just to give ourselves a sense of being. And then in another song, a different song, he wrote, it begins with a blessing, but it ends with a curse, making life easy, but making it worse. He kind of very easy rhymes in his songs. So again, I felt these were very insightful, that it makes life easy, it gives us a focus. Yes, I can make that terrible neighbor as the source of all my problems. That other monk who's that problem to me, or that person I work with in the office, or this unrequited love, or this incurable illness, or this debt that I've got. The mind can focus on that. It makes life easy because it gives us a thing to be. I am this person who's got this debt. I am the person who's got this achievement. I've got this conflict. I have got this love, or this unrequited love, or whatever it might be. This resentment, and in a way, the more the more it can't be fixed, the more that you can't fulfill that desire, the better. So a regret for something that's broken in the past that can't be mended. Those kind of things are really ideal for this sort of purpose. If only I'd made a different choice 30 years ago, then, of course you can't fix it now. So there's no danger of getting what you want, right? So the fear of freedom, sometimes when the worst thing that can happen is getting what you want, having that desire gratified. And so that because what we like is on a very deep level is what we fear what we like is defined being, and what we fear is undefined being, not being something, because that feels like death. Ego, the kind of ego death, not being something. We'd rather be, as it says, I'd rather be a brilliant wounded fragment, someone whose heart has been broken that can never be repaired, than someone who's got no problems. Now you might think, well, I'd like to have no problems, thank you very much. But if we look at our lives, how often is that the case? That we choose to have some kind of achievement or a problem or a worry, just to make us feel like, have something to find that will give us a front to put something behind. How many, just on an ordinary everyday level, how many of us say you're tidying up your home, you're working at some set of tasks, and you finally get the kitchen cleaned, or the beds are all made, or your emails are finally all answered, and you plunk yourself down in the chair and you go, thank goodness that's done. And then 1, 2, 3. Within 5 seconds, and I'm not psychic, but this is just statistically, within about 5 seconds, most of us are going, okay, well, I should be worrying about something. There's something I should be doing, and we feel uncomfortable. And then we remember, oh yeah, I've got to write those other emails, or I've got that other room to clean, or I've got that. Oh my goodness, I've got to go and do the shopping. We remember some other duty, some other problem. Oh, there's still that monk I've got to deal with. Oh, right, there's that. And then part of us goes, oh dear, another headache. But behind that, there's like, I'm somebody again, right? So this fearing to leave fear behind is we want to keep those worries going because it makes us feel like somebody. This is why, on a political level, and this is a sweeping statement, that countries like to have an enemy. That we like to have them, who's not us, because then if there's a defined enemy, then it gives us a sense of identity. When we haven't got any enemies, who are we? And I often quote this statement made by the Soviet foreign minister in the time of Glasnost and Perestroika, when Gorbachev was the general secretary of the Communist Party in the Soviet era. And he was trying to liberalize the Soviet Union and develop better relationships with the West. And then it was this very potent meeting that happened where Mr. Shevardnadze was at this high-level meeting in Washington, D.C., and they were all sitting around the conference table. And then he looked around the room and said, "We are going to do something terrible to you." Forgive my bad Russian accent. Any Russians who are here, please forgive my bad Russian accent. But we are going to do something terrible to you. And then he was quite a good performer, so he can let the pregnant pause sort of hover there. He said, "We are going to deprive you of an enemy." So the Americans thought he's going to declare they got this new neutron bomb that can wipe everybody out, or this new kind of laser Star Wars weapon. But it was even worse. He was going to deprive them of an enemy. And even though I realize it's a sweeping statement, but you will notice that as soon as communism stopped being a major threat to the West, then Islam sort of grew up and became kind of the problem. Perhaps a coincidence. But I suspect that on that need to have something that defines us is a them that there's an opposition with, and that hungering for defined being is a very powerful force in our lives. So I feel that in this respect, to get to know that what is that in us that wants to have some a feeling of identity, that feels relieved when we have a problem, when we suddenly realize, oh, I might have finished the washing up, but I've got a £150,000 mortgage I've got to pay off. Right. Yeah. That feels relieved at the memory of that difficulty. And what is that? Where does that come from? And I would suggest it's this longing for defined being, a sense of I, a me. Even if it's a pained me, a me who's in a state of conflict or suffering, it's on one level, if the perceptions are based around self-view, that feels better than an undefined being of not being anything, not having a defined sense of I and me and mine. On an instinctual level, that's death. That's ego death. Another thing I like to quote, which many of you will probably have heard me mention in different Dhamma talks about ego death and such like, that particularly in the West, but it's fairly global nowadays, we tend to be more identified with our egos and our personalities than we are with our bodies. So about 20 years ago now, Harvard University Psychology Department did an in-depth survey about fear, what people were afraid of. And they surveyed about 6,000 or 7,000 people as an American population. And so then they came up with a top 10 things that people were afraid of. And when they did all the statistics. So number 10 on the list was having your house burgled and having your possessions stolen. This is just a rough memory of it. I didn't look it up on Wikipedia this time. But so number 8 on the list would be like being physically attacked and injured by somebody. Number 6 is having a member of your family dying, or number 5 would be your own physical chronic illness and death. Number 3 would be your country being in a state of war, and the risk of your home and your family being killed and murdered. Number 2 was nuclear destruction, nuclear war, and destruction of the planet. And do we know what number 1 was on the list? Public speaking. So we are more afraid of dying on stage than destruction of life on earth. That, to me, is an amazing statistic. I mean, I quite like statistics if they're reliable. So to me, that's an amazing statistic. We're more afraid, dying on stage is worse than nuclear war and the destruction of millions and millions of people and animals and the poisoning of the atmosphere for generations and generations to come. Me looking bad in front of them. Yeah, me making a fool of myself, me dying on stage is a worse prospect. So we are heavily identified with our egos. And so ego death is terrifying. So the Buddha's teaching then is extraordinarily helpful and particular in the way it focuses upon that sense of I and me and mine, and particularly insight meditation. And so in terms of this issue that we're reflecting on today, fearing to leave fear behind, then there are particular approaches of meditation and the development of insight where we can look at the nature of emotion very directly and train the mind not to take emotion personally, or thought and opinion, to not take it personally, and in particular to develop that way of seeing our mind and our life in terms of not self, to see the empty, transparent nature of self-view, that feeling of I and me and mine as not being fundamental absolute realities, but more as being psychological structures that have a form, they have a role to play in the mind, but they are not who and what we are. The sense of self is not who and what we are. It's just a particular feeling, a particular quality of attitude. It's a psychological structure. The I feeling, the me feeling, the mine feeling. Those are aspects or patterns of attitude that form within us, that have a purpose in our lives, in the family, in the social world, in work and functioning in the living world, but they're not absolute realities. So the Buddha's teachings on the development of insight and particularly the reflection on anatta is directly pointed at seeing through that I, me, and mine feeling. We have terms that he used like ahankara, which means made of I am. Ahang means I am, kara means made. So made of I am, the I am feeling, and then mamankara, Mama is mine. So the primordial owning is the child owning the mother. Mama, mama, mama. So mama in Pali is the word for mine. Maybe that's a false etymology, but that's the word for mine is mama. So that that feeling of owning, again, is called mamankara, the mine feeling, or the feeling of mineness. So, in terms of a particular meditation method, then this is something that Luang Por Sumedho taught a lot about. I lived here from 1985 to 95. So before this spell of time here, when I came here in 2010, I lived here for 10 years in that earlier period of Amaravati's life. And during that era, Luang Por Sumedho gave many, many teachings about this, say, developing of mindfulness around emotion and learning how not to take emotion and our problems personally. And over again, as many of you know who've been his students for a long time, he would have a particular theme that he would work for a few years and then use that over and over again. So maybe a number of you will remember him saying, it's not me and my problems, but rather the Buddha seeing the Dhamma. That's a change of paradigm. He said we need a paradigm shift from me and my problems, me and my fear problem, or me and my anger problem, me and my conceit problem, or my jealousy problem, or my regret problem, whatever. Insert your particular your favorite obsession here. Fill in the blank yourself. But they say rather than seeing things in terms of me and my problem, we need a paradigm shift so that it's viewed in a different way. That it's the Buddha mind, the awake mind, seeing the way things are, or the Buddha seeing the Dhamma, is the awake, aware quality of mind, seeing the way things are. So, going back to fear, so it was during this time that I became aware that I was an extremely fear-conditioned person. I didn't realize that at first, until I, with Luang Por Sumedho giving teachings on this kind of at least once a day, if not twice a day, hearing him speak about it over and over again, eventually it began to sink in. So I was extremely thick in respect to this. But it was I began to realize that my fundamental relationship to life was, if it exists, worry about it. That if whatever it was, whether it's internal or external. Whether it's something, what does that person think of me? Is the meal going to be offered on time? Will we get to the airport in time to catch the plane? Should I have said things in such and such a way to that nun because she's looking upset and maybe I said something wrong? Whatever it was, internally, externally, practical or impractical, with a foundation or without a foundation. Basically, if it exists, I would worry about it. Even an example I often give is lighting one of the wood-burning stoves. I had a newspaper that was about 3 years old, and you know how it can be. You see an old newspaper and you start reading the story. So there was an account in this newspaper of a goalkeeper who was facing a penalty and made a stupid mistake, and then the other team scored a winning penalty. And so I'm feeling, really anxious for this goalkeeper in his career. And I thought, I don't even care about football, and it was 3 years ago, and I'm just using the newspaper to light a fire, and here I am getting worried, quite sort of uptight and tense, all over for this, the missed shot that the goalkeeper went the wrong way and let the goal in. So this is crazy. So it was very helpful to be hearing Luang Por Sumedho speaking about this over and over again, and I began to see I was just worried all the time. But then. Again, he would very helpfully explain, well, we might say to ourselves, I have a lust problem or a worry problem or an anger problem. I'm always angry. So we say that, but we aren't always angry. It comes and goes. We might say, I'm always worried, but we're not. It comes and goes. We might say, I'm always lustful, but we're not. It comes and goes. So your first reaction is, well, he doesn't know my mind. But then when you look, you realize, yeah, it's true. It comes and goes. And then he taught this very, very helpful method of meditation on the area of emotion. And what he encouraged was, if there's a particular emotion that you find yourself, say, preoccupied with, let's say in my case, fear and worry, then in the meditation, make the mind as calm as possible and then deliberately invite that feeling in. So bring to mind a memory of something that was worrying in this instance, something that you were afraid of. So deliberately remember something or think of something that rouses, that triggers that feeling, and then notice the sensation that brings in the body. And so I would find worry would be like a knot of tension in the abdomen, in the solar plexus. It'd be a kind of tight, knotted feeling. I said, and then the main trick of this meditation method is, once you've launched it by remembering that difficult conversation or what he thinks about me or how's that going to work out, you trigger it with a story or an image, but then you deliberately let go of that image, that story, and turn the attention back 180 degrees and say, how does it, well, that might be where it came from, but how does it feel in the body? So you trigger the experience through a memory or an idea, and then you take the attention off the story and bring it into the body. Okay, this feeling of anger, where is it? This feeling of lust or fear or jealousy, where is it? How do I feel it? Is it a tightness in the gut? Is it a steel bar across my shoulders? Is it just an inability to breathe, a tightness in the throat? What is it? How do you feel it? And it's going to be different for everybody, for different emotions. But there's a physical sensation that is a corollary of every emotional state that we feel. So what he would encourage is then you bring your attention onto that physical sensation, and then with all the effort you can muster, then open the heart to that feeling. So he would say, have loving kindness for that sensation. You're not pretending that you like it or that it's beautiful or good, but here it is, that tightness in the throat, that knot in the belly, that steel bar across your shoulders. Just know that feeling and fully accept it. Have the quality of metta, radical acceptance, a full acceptance of that feeling. And so then sustain that for a few minutes. And then, after you've fully known that and you've got to a place where that is genuinely accepted, there's a genuine open-heartedness of, yes, it's a steel bar across my shoulders, but it's just a feeling. There's this knot in my belly, but it is just a feeling. It's not pleasant, but here it is. It's just this. That's all. Then, once that's really been accepted, then take the next few minutes to let it go, let the body relax, let that feeling dissipate, and let the body come back to the state where you started from. Now, it can be that it takes you 5 seconds to trigger that emotion, and then 30 minutes for it to fade away. That can easily be the case. But in that process, it's important just to stay with it for as long as it takes for the whole thing to fade, until that cycle has finished, so that you're deliberately triggering the emotion. It happens, it rises up, you're aware of it, you start to let go of it, you let go of it, let go of it. Finally, the contributory causes to it have faded, and you come back to zero. So in that process, you watch that whole emotional state, and speaking of fear, you watch that be born, come into being, do its thing, and fade away. You've seen it as a sankhara, as a formation in nature, as a non-personal quality. Fear feels like this. It's not a person. It doesn't belong to a person. It's just a pattern in nature, like the sound of a word, or the color of the carpet, or the feeling of the air on our skin. It's just a set of perceptions. That's all. It's not personal. It's not me and mine. It's just this. It has this. It's experienced here, but it's not a personal thing. So that I found amazingly helpful. So for the next, and I could really relate to that and found that very, very beneficial. So for the next 2 or 3 years, I made that the sort of central point of my meditation. So at the beginning of every day, I would set because I really wanted to work on fear, and even though I could see there was that being worried about something did give me a sense of identity, that and there was also part of me that did want to leave fear behind. I saw that the way that we can leave fear behind in a genuine way is for it to be seen with the eye of Dhamma, to be seen as not self, not who and what we are, and recognizing that fear has its place in nature. Fear is like physical pain; it's what protects us. It's useful that our ancestors who didn't step back from the edge of the cliff are the ones who fell over and didn't have children. the ones who heard that rustle in the bushes and thought, and they thought, well, that's not going to be a saber-toothed tiger. That kind of thing doesn't happen to me. They're the ones that got eaten, and the ones who thought, I don't like the sound of that, and who scuttled away to the village, they're the ones who were indeed our ancestors. That's how fear works. It's a protection. So rather than fear being seen as a problem or as an infection or as an affliction, instead we see that it's a helpful protective device in nature that we don't have to see personally. And so for 2 or 3 years, I at the beginning of every day, I set the intention, whenever the feeling of worry, whether it's about my mind or the past or the future, or whether it's about another person or an event or the work we're doing, whatever it might be latched onto, to notice that, to notice the feeling of worrying, bring the attention into the body, notice the tightness in the gut, to be aware of that, to let go, let it relax. And then, very interestingly, after you do that, after you've, say, carried out this process, because you can do it, the first kind of aspect of the practice I was describing, doing in the meditation hall, but once you've kind of developed the technique, you find that you can use it on the fly as well. In business meetings, with the breakfast with your family, on the tube, in Dhamma talks at the monastery, wherever. You can use that as a practice, and that once you have, say, the relaxed the body, and that the system has sort of come to a place of calmness and ease, then, and this was in a way the most helpful thing that Luang Por Sumedho encouraged. He would say, okay, once you've let go of that particular worry and the mind has come back to its starting point, ask yourself, what was it that I was worried about? What was it that I was annoyed about? What was it that he said that was so bad? Or why is she so wonderful? And then you ask yourself that question, and you go, oh yes, and it takes a couple of seconds to reassemble the problem with respect to fear. That when the body is relaxed and the mind is awake and there's no sense of self, then when you ask that question, what was it I was worried about? What was there to be afraid of? Oh yes, and then that worry can reform. But for a moment, there is no thing to worry about. There is no thing that you're lacking, no thing that is a problem. This is offered for reflection. You might think, well, you don't know my mind. But this is how it worked with me, and I've been using this practice for more than 20 years, 30 years now. And that is one of the most revealing things. If you don't make it a problem, it's not a problem. If you don't say that is something to be afraid of, it's not frightening. The fear comes from the subject, not from the object. So I'm not dismissing fear as an affliction or as a disease or a problem, because it does have its place in nature. It's useful. As I said, our ancestors who were afraid are the ones who survived. So if you're too casual and too unmindful or not careful in situations where it's good to be careful, like driving on the M25 or negotiating the North Circular, then pay attention, be cautious. But it's where fear spills over and becomes a neurotic problem. That's where it becomes more significant. So, in terms of fearing to leave fear behind, I would say that what's driving that, what in a way makes us want to be worried, wants to be anxious, or wants to be fretful, it's a hungering to be. It's that urge for defined being. That's what's driving it. And when the mind changes its point of view from me and my problems, or me and the world, to here's the awake mind seeing the way things are, then that force that makes us want to be afraid, or want to be irritated, or want to be in a state of longing, or unrequited love, or unrequited aversion, that it's lost its fuel. If there isn't that I, me, and mine aspect of the mind, that urge, it's like a car with no petrol in it. It can't run. There's no fuel there. There's nothing to activate it. So, in that respect, we can learn to live free from fear. We can say we, as I said, we use fear where it's appropriate, like negotiating with the other cars on the M25, or being cautious in terms of dealing with difficult situations and so forth. That's where that caution and fear and careful attention is really useful. But that, I would say, it doesn't take much wisdom to recognize, well, that's more like careful attention, wise attention, rather than the kind of neurotic problem of fearfulness. So that when we let go of self-view, when that element is taken out of the picture, then we find that the mind is much more at ease with undefined being, and that sense of not being something, or letting go of the habits of identity, and not being a monk or a doctor or a teacher or a mother or a child, or not being British or not being Sri Lankan or Thai or a man or a woman. We are much more comfortable with those being convenient fictions that we use. The mind is not taking refuge in those structures, and so that then that when that sense of sort of hungering for defined being, when that doesn't have the fuel of self-view, that falls away. And that lack of definition, rather than being felt as a kind of ego death and as a disaster, as a problem to be avoided at all costs, instead it's experienced as freedom itself. Like everything is impermanent, all things are uncertain. Yeah, from the point of self-view, it's like, don't say that. Yeah. You make me worried. From the point of view of wisdom, then everything's impermanent, everything is uncertain. It's like, yeah, of course, duh. Yeah. How could it be otherwise? Was it ever not that way? And so that then that sense of doubt and recognizing the intrinsic uncertainty of things, that brings with it a quality of freedom rather than a quality of threat. So when the heart faces the unknown, when the ego faces the unknown, it experiences fear and danger. It's threatening. What's going to happen to me? But when the heart meets the unknown, then what it experiences is wonderment. What it experiences is freedom. It's like, yes, everything is uncertain. There are no boundaries. There are no forms that are reliable. No conditions are dependable. Of course, it's never been otherwise. And so that the heart itself tastes that as experiences as freedom, knows that as the taste of freedom. So perhaps your experience is different. We'll have time in the questions and answer period to explore that. But I would suggest this is the way that it works, and is really the essence of insight meditation. Because with the development of vipassana, many of you have done meditation retreats or had instruction in vipassana meditation. But the essence of vipassana is that when the mind is calm enough and steady enough so it can focus on the experience of the present moment, as a deliberate challenging of thought and feeling and emotion, perception, of asking those questions. Who is it that hears this sound? Yeah. Who is this? Who does this thought belong to? Does this mind have an owner? Is this feeling in the leg? Is this me and mine? If it's mine, what's the me that's doing the owning? What does that me look like? Where is it? What shape is it? Does it have a weight? Does it have a form? Where is it? And then we use those kinds of pathways of exploration to say puncture those habits of self-view. So there's an active development of that freeing of the heart of the bounds of self-view, developing the insight into not self. And that's what brings about that sense of letting go, of not attaching to perceptions and thoughts, emotions and forms. And then in that non-attachment, the heart experiences its own natural freedom. When the heart is not tied to what is not self, to those limited compounded forms of a thought or a feeling, a memory, an idea, an emotion. When the heart is not tied to those, then it's not limited by those. It's like if you are inside this building, we're limited by the building. If you step outside the building, you're not limited by the building. So that if the heart has stepped outside those conditions, stepped outside being a woman, being a man, being old, being young, being healthy, being sick, being a success, being a failure, whatever the identities that we have, when it steps outside, then there's an experience of freedom rather than an experience of loss or danger. So I feel that Erich Fromm was extremely insightful back in the 1940s, and he saw, fear of freedom. We prefer that some kind of inferior defined reality to that genuine freedom. But I would say we don't have to be that way. We don't have to be, say, locked into that that fearfulness, but rather by understanding fear, by understanding self-view, understanding the way emotions work, and then training the mind to see them differently, to see that is here is the Buddha mind, the awake mind, seeing the way things are rather than me and my problem. We make that paradigm shift, then we are able to recognize and experience that freedom, even as we have the limitations. Our debts are not paid off. We still can't fly. You still haven't got an infinite amount of money to acquire all the things that might be pleasing or interesting, but the heart is not limited by those conditions, because it's not investing in them. It's not say making those into who and what we are. It's not taking refuge in those limited conditions.
Thank you. Thank you, Ajahn Amaro. I will kick off if there's no one asking any questions. Thank you so much for the discourse. But there is another element which I'd like to bring to your attention, which is concerning fear. And particularly when you act in a fearless way, there are also consequences. And consequences from external forces. That has been my experience when you put your neck outside and neck on the line. And there are consequences. The Buddha himself talked at length about fear. Mm-hmm. And the political climate at that time. And one of his disciples, Moggallana, lost his life, allegedly as a result of coming into contact with certain forces which were against what was going on at the time. And the Buddha challenged...
The story is that he was attacked by bandits.
Indian bandits or whatever.
Yes.
There is another thing where I read that he was attacked by other religious elements. Whether that is right or not, I don't know. But anyway, the critical element is that the Buddha also said that, talked at length after he left Kapilavastu, that he talked about the climate of fear as a result of fearful discussions, the ferocity of discussions concerning religious debates which were at that time. So there is, whilst you deal with fear and act fearlessly, there would also be consequences which you need to also face.
I would say that it depends on what kind of fearlessness. If it's a fearlessness that is informed with wisdom and mindfulness, then you say that you have, as demonstrated by the Buddha, then the results are often very peaceful and transformative. So, for example, when he was verbally attacked in the street by Akosaka Bharadvaja, who was a Brahmin who was very upset with all of the high-class people who were becoming the Buddha's disciples and then walking around the street barefoot and begging for food, and in his eyes seeing it as a sort of disgraceful behavior and ruining the society. So he criticized the Buddha and was particularly upset because another Brahmin had just joined the Buddha's order of Buddha's disciples. So then, Akosaka means abusive. So his name was Bharadvaja the Abusive, and so he stopped the Buddha in the street and verbally attacked him. And then the Buddha said to him, Bharadvaja, is it the case that sometimes family and friends come to visit you? And he said, yes, of course they do. I'm an ordinary householder. People come and visit me all the time. I said, well, if people come and visit you, do you offer them food and drink if they come, some refreshments? Well, of course I do. That's a polite, ordinary human thing to do. Naturally, I do that. And then the Buddha said, so if you offer them some refreshments, some food and drink, and they decline that, then to whom does that food and drink belong? So, well, it belongs to me, of course. They haven't accepted it, so it's still mine. Why are you asking? It's a stupid question. And the Buddha said, Brahmin, you offer me your anger. I don't accept it. It therefore belongs to you. So the Buddha was attacked, but he was not intimidated. And then, interestingly enough, through that exchange, faith arose in Kosaka Bharadvaja, and he became the Buddha's disciple, and he eventually became an arahant. And even when he was an arahant, he was still known as a Kosaka Bharadvaja. So he was an enlightened monk called the Abusive. That was his nickname was the Abusive. Yeah. So, and then the famous story of the Buddha being say attacked by Nalagiri, the elephant, so charging down the street towards him, and with physical fear, physical threat to his life. And then Ananda tried to stand in front of him, and the Buddha said, "No, stand aside, Ananda. There's no, I'm not in danger." And then through the power of loving kindness, then the elephant slowed down and slowed down and slowed down, and then eventually stopped. So these are mythological stories, but they also they represent a skillful use of fearlessness. If our fearlessness is more woven in with self-view, like I'm not afraid, I'm going to oppose these people, I don't care what they do to me, then there's I would say I'm kind of over exaggerating it, but if there is self-view woven into that, then there's very likely to be a much more contentious and painful and conflicted result. So my experience is the more that we can, in those sort of situations where you're being threatened or attacked, either physically or verbally, that the more that you can genuinely attune the mind to the situation and not create negativity around that, then, which is very challenging, the more that we can genuinely move things towards a skillful resolution. Now, the Buddha sets the bar very high. In one of his teachings, he said, it was called the simile of the saw. He says, if you were kidnapped by bandits, so in the story of Moggallana, he was being chased by bandits, and it was because he killed his parents in a previous lifetime, that was an unavoidable karmic result, according to the stories of Moggallana dying at the hands of the bandits. But anyway, in the simile of the saw, in that discourse, the Buddha says, if you were kidnapped by bandits and they were sawing you in half, sawing you limb from limb with a two-handled saw, if you give rise to a thought of hatred towards those people doing that, then you're not following my teaching. Whoa, yes. So that's the kind of Olympic class patience. So the Buddha was a genius at creating images that stick in your mind, and that's one of them. It's like you think it would be reasonable to have a bit of hatred, a bit of resentment. It would be allowable when people are sawing your arms and legs off. But he's pointing out that there's never any justification for hatred. That hatred can't be in alignment with Dhamma. It doesn't mean that you have to be passive. It doesn't mean that you don't take action to avoid being harmed or to say minimize the danger or damage of a situation. But you can't justify hatred and have that in accordance with Dhamma. And that's he's deliberately overemphasizing it. He's kind of ramps it up so that you get the point. Even in an extreme situation like that. And we might feel that that's an extreme example, but in China, the most highly respected monk of the modern age in China, who passed away in 1959, was Venerable Master Shu Yun. And he was so highly respected. There are 5 different lineages, nikayas of Buddhism in China: the Chan meditation lineage, the Sutra study lineage, the recitation lineage, the Vinaya lineage, and the esoteric lineage. So he was the patriarch, he was the Sangharaja of all five, because he was so highly respected by everybody. So he was seen as a great danger by the new communist government. So he was attacked by members of the communist army, and they came to his monastery, and he was already about 110 years old at this point, and he was born in 1839, died in 1959. So he was about 110 years old, and they came to his monastery, and they beat him beat him bloody, and broke his arms and legs, and left him for dead, and he didn't die. And after a few weeks, and he recovered, and then the word got back to the communist army that he was still alive. So they went back again. Instead of using wooden clubs, they used iron bars, and they sort of beat him to a pulp. And so his disciples couldn't believe that he was still alive after that kind of physical damage. But he still lived, but he was in a coma. He was unconscious for a long time. But when he came around, he was still physically extremely wounded and damaged. And then his disciples said to him, Shurfu, you're incredibly compassionate and kind, and we realize that you're staying alive out of an act of will, but please don't. You're experiencing so much pain, so much difficulty. Don't do this for us. Please. You're 110 years old. You've lived a wonderful life. You're revered by everyone. You've brought incredible blessings into the world. Please. Please do let yourself pass away. Don't stay alive just for us. And then he said to them, "It's not for you. I am staying alive by an act of will, but it's not for you. It's on account of the people who attacked me. If I died on account of the injuries they gave me, the karmic result for them would be so awful. I can't be responsible for that." That's a true story. That's a well-accredited story. And then he recovered from that. And by that time, the communist army realized, we better not mess with this guy. Whoever this is, we better change our tactics, because this is something else. So they left him alone after that. And interestingly enough, the teachings, the meditation method that Lumpur Sumedho learnt when he was a layman, before he went to Thailand, was from a retreat that was led by Master Shu Yun 4 years after that, when he was 114, in 1952-53. He gave in Shanghai. So after that time, he was still running meditation retreats and giving Dhamma talks. So if you look at the book Chan and Zen Training by Charles Luke, then it's from when Master Shu Yun was 114 years old. So we can be fearless, and also that fearlessness can have a good result. So that what effect that had on the lives of those soldiers who were responsible for attacking him, and their officers who ordered it, I don't know. But the fact that they then called off the troops and said, "Okay, we better leave this person alone, because we're meddling with something that's beyond our scope," even with the materialistic outlook of the communist army. So I think there's a categorical difference in our fearlessness, and that the more that we can be aware of those habits of self-view, and the degree to which our sense of what is right and what is noble is informed by a genuine attunement to the time, the place, the situation, and is free of self-view. When our actions are guided by mindfulness and wisdom rather than by my opinion or my plan or my ideals as the guiding force, then the result is going to be more beneficial for everybody, I would say.
How do you then explain what happened to Gandhi and to Martin Luther King, both who were extremely erudite in terms of the way they acted and behaved, in terms of both the assassinations of both of them?
Well, Gandhi was chanting Ram, Ram, Ram when he died, so he didn't have any hatred towards his attacker. Anyway, I don't. There are other people who have other questions to ask. So, Oshani, please, you had a question.
Ajahn Amaro, I wanted to ask you about fear that sometimes arises from experience. So I recently went through an experience which was complex and very good for my practice, but it also generated a certain amount of fear, and the conditions have changed dramatically. They don't exist at all, but the memory of the fear sometimes comes back.
You mean the things that caused the fear have gone?
Yeah. So the external conditions have completely changed. But sometimes the experience and the memory of fear comes back, and then fear comes back. So I was trying to let it go, and I try to see it through anicca, dukkha, anatta. Got a little less, but it still hasn't gone completely. So I'd like to know how you can completely let it go.
Well, as I was saying in the talk, I spent 2 or 3 years just focusing on that as the main thing I was doing with my meditation every day. Living here at Amaravati, so from about 88, 89, 90, that was at the beginning of every day. I would set that intention, because if you have it as a sort of as a side issue, I found, then the habits were so strong, and it wasn't a single issue. It was, as I said, kind of multifaceted. But the habit was so strong, the ruts were so deep, that if I tried to just sort of work with it as a sort of side issue, but I was busy kind of doing other things, it didn't seem to have there wasn't a clear enough perspective on it. So at the beginning of every day, I would set the clear conscious intention during the morning meditation. During today, whenever my mind moves towards fear or worry, anxiety about anything, internal or external, whatever it is, then as soon as I notice that, I'll bring the attention into the body, notice where is it felt, and then be aware of that, feel it, know that quality of tension, and then consciously let it relax. After it's relaxed, I'll then look and say and ask myself, what was the problem, or what were you afraid of? So I'd set that as a clear intention every day. This is the plan. This is the program for the day. Other stuff is happening. I was secretary for Amaravati. I was kind of often the work monk or the guest monk, and other kinds of things going on. I had many other responsibilities, but I made, in terms of spiritual training, that was the main thing I was doing every day. So for yourself, I would say, okay, you really want to make a focus on that. Was set an intention at the beginning of every day, along with everything else that you're doing with your work and your studies and everything. So, okay, during today, whenever the mind experiences a wave of that kind of anxiety, that worry, it recreates that feeling, go to the body. Where has it felt? Know it as a sensation. Consciously let it relax. And as I said in the talk, one of the most amazing things is that when the body is relaxed and there's a sense of ease, that okay. And then you ask the question, what was the problem? That's that gap of like a 2-second gap of like, oh, well, of course it's my problem. Of course it's my problem. It's my problem. But it has to reassemble it. It's like the pieces have to be put back together for it to work. If it's not assembled, it's not a problem. And so that in itself is a sort of a very loud clue. If you don't make it a problem, it is not a problem. That what you're calling an it that is a problem, it's not really a problem, and it's not really an it either. And so the more that is seen, that this is a constructed thing that my mind has created because of certain conditions, and then some things are going to have a lot of weight. If you're dealing with professional jealousy and you share an office with someone that is, you're going daggers at each other, that's being regenerated every day. So it's a fresh, live situation. It's not just a memory, but it's being recreated. So, but still, I found that making a clear, conscious intention every day. After two or 3 years, at the end of that time, I'm not boasting, but it was radically different. I mean, I used to be a real worrywart. It was really interesting as an aside. So in 1983, I did this walk through England from Chithurst Monastery to Harnham Monastery in Northumberland, and I wrote a book called The Long Road North. And so a number of years later, about 2008, 2009, some people said, well, you visited us on that walk, Ajahn. It's a really nice book. There was only 1,000 copies printed. Can we help you make an online edition? And I thought, okay, that's very nice. It'd be a little project to reconnect with those people. So I hadn't read the book for 20 years. When I was writing it and editing it and so on, and I was very close up to it. But between when I wrote it in 1984 and then this, which was 2008, 2009, is 25 years later. So then going through the text, it was shocking. Like every page, I was worried. I was afraid. It was really a problem that, I was really concerned. I was so worried. Like, every page. It's just like jumping off the page. I was worried. I was afraid. It was a problem. I didn't know what to think. What was going to happen? It's like, wow, I was really anxious. And the interesting thing was, at the time when I wrote the book and edited it, I didn't even see that. That was not noticeable at the time. That was not a thing. But then 25 years later, it's like, wow, I was really a case. But it was at the time. It was just like breathing, like oxygen. Of course, there's oxygen. You wouldn't be alive if there was oxygen. Wasn't oxygen. It was that worry, that fear was just ever present. So I just don't function in the same way anymore, which is great. So I would recommend trying the same sort of thing.
Thank you. Anyway, it could be less than 2 to 3 years.
The faster you hurry, the slower you go. That's my answer to that. So any questions from this side? No doubts on the left-hand side of the room? Yes, there's one down here. Oops. The microphone's not on. So.
This relationship between feelings and bodily sensations, just wondering whether it's mentioned anywhere in the sutras. But I've experienced it myself. I know it's true. But just wondering whether there are any references to that sort of thing in the sutras.
You have fear and trembling. Is a very common expression in the Pali Suttas, and then the Buddha also talking about his own practice. It's not so much in details about Vedana sort of located in particular places in the body, as far as I'm aware. Ajahn Vinita's not here today. I think it's he talks about it in terms of like fear and trembling, like that sense of anxiety in the body, but the like particular locations or particular qualities of sensation, I don't think that's detailed in the canon. But there's the Bhaya-Bhairava Sutta, in the Majjhima Nikaya middle-length discourses. The Buddha talks about his meditation before his enlightenment, and he was living in the forest and you hear rustling in the branches, go, what's that? And then it would be a peacock settling down for the night, or he'd hear breathing noises in the bushes, and he'd be anxious. And so it talks about how he dealt with fear, and that fear and trembling, and so that it's not detailed in the canon, but like many aspects of Buddhist practice. The great elders over the centuries, that they've taken particular teachings or suttas or statements from the canon, and then sort of develop their own practice, their own way of explaining and developing the meditation in a more detailed way around that. So this is one instance of that. Yes, there's a hand at the back there. Got a long walk. Put your hand up again. So there we go.
During the break, Ajahn, a Dharma friend said that I saw her limping, and she said she'd hurt her knee. She'd torn her meniscus, and I said, "Well, you're not there, and nor's your knee. Didn't you listen to the talk, And I was thinking about it, because, the Buddha puts two truths. There's the mundane and the absolute. Now, the mundane, I believe, is human being, and the absolute is clear mind, because unless on that level, although it may be illusionary, unless I have the level that there's a you and a me, empathy can't exist because I cannot say that I feel what you feel. And that's where empathy is born, you know. So the Dalai Lama normally talks on the human level and Buddhist level, you know. And I can't understand if there's a denial that we exist, then what can feel anything?
I'm not sure what you're asking. And there's the experience of pain, and the Buddha himself experienced chronic pain when he was an old man, and so the issue is say that in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, the discourse the Buddha gives about the final days of his life, it starts off with him saying his body is like an old cart held together with strings and straps, and there's no position that he can be in that is comfortable. The only way he can experience ease is to completely absorb his mind into emptiness, like sort of dissociating his attention from the sense world. If he's paying attention to the body and sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, he's experiencing pain. But he knew how not to make suffering out of it. So he's not creating an I, a me, or a mine around that. But there's painful feelings. So you get quite a number of suttas when the Buddha's in his old age, where he says, "Sariputta, my back is paining me. I'm going to go and lie down. The assembly is still awake. You give them a Dhamma talk because I'm going to go and rest." So that you have a fully enlightened Buddha, and he's not creating suffering around that, but he's recognizing the body's generating so much pain. It's that it needs to be attended to. The system needs to be looked after, and so saying, well. Sariputta can give a talk, and I'll go and rest. Or you have descriptions of him leaning against a pillar in the center of the Dhamma hall because his back was aching, and that gave him some relief while he was giving a Dhamma teaching. Or there's a very lovely little sutta where he's sitting on the veranda of his kuti and getting a heat treatment from the setting sun. He says he's sort of sitting on the veranda of his kuti, and the setting sun is kind of warming his back to ease his muscles because his back was aching. And then Ananda makes a comment, "Oh, it's amazing, it's incredible. When the master was young, his skin was so clear and so bright, and now he's old, his skin is all kind of wrinkled and flabby, and how the effect of age has even had its impact on the Blessed One." So I'd say it's not having an idea. And one of the later talks during this series is something about how can I practice if I don't exist? And I'm not sure who's giving that talk. I don't think it's got my name on it. But that's the kind of misunderstanding of anatta. It's like trying to assume that trying to convince ourselves that we don't exist. But rather, it's learning to relate to the experience of the field of experience, seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, feeling, knowing, from a non-personal perspective. So it's like changing the point of view from a self-centered perspective to a Dhamma-centered perspective. Essentially seeing things in terms of nature. So that it's going against the habits of personalizing an opinion or a feeling or a thought. So that one of the phrases I use a lot nowadays is, the mind is not a person. We relate to it very personally, like my thoughts, my feelings, my opinions, my memories, my plans, my story. And that seems very matter-of-fact and ordinary, but when the different aspects of mind and experience are looked at, then femininity, masculinity are patterns of experience. Comfort, discomfort are patterns of experience. Color and sound and form and taste and sensation, they're patterns of experience. They arise and they pass away. They're known here in this field of awareness, but that knowing is, I would say, is not a person. And just taking a simple reflection like that, the mind is not a person. It isn't a self. It doesn't belong to a self. That's a way of holding up a mirror to those strong personalizing habits, like, well, I am a man, I am a woman, I am English, I am 61 years old, or I am this or I am that. And it's saying, yes, that's relatively true, but it can't be absolutely true. So the distinction, I feel that's most important is in the Buddha's teaching about, say, in relationship to pain and fear of pain, and what makes us sort of run away from that threat of, I don't want to experience that physical pain or that psychological pain. I want to get away from that because that is dangerous to me. That the teaching that the Buddha gave, called the arrow, which is another very well-known teaching, is a short sutta called the Salla Sutta in the Samyutta Nikaya. And the Buddha uses a military image because he uses a lot of military analogies in his teachings. He says, using the image of a soldier being shot by an arrow on a battlefield. So the first arrow nobody can avoid. If you have a body, you have a mind. If you're born, then physical pain is an absolutely unavoidable actuality of the experience of existing. Having been born, there will be pain. That's unavoidable. Nobody can avoid the first arrow. So that kind of pain is non-negotiable. The second arrow is the resenting, the negotiating. It shouldn't be this way. This isn't fair. When's this going to be over? Oh, what's this going to turn into? What's going to happen to me? Yeah. So that's what turns an ache in your knee in the meditation hall into an imagined trip to the emergency room, or a knee replacement, or or whatever. The mind's proliferation around that sensation. So the second arrow is the suffering that the mind creates around that experience of pain. So the second arrow is totally negotiable. So when the Buddha talks about the ending of suffering, it's all about the second arrow, not the first one. That the Buddha's teaching is not about ending physical suffering. It's not about ending even emotional suffering. If someone who's close to you has died, then you feel sadness. If you see some pain being inflicted upon some other being, then you empathize, you feel sad. But what the mind does with that, whether it's physical pain or emotional pain, that's all the first arrow. The second arrow is, when's this going to be over? This hurts so much, or it's not fair. I thought I'd done all my exercises. This shouldn't be happening. This is really inconvenient, and so on and so forth. So that and I feel it's really helpful that the Buddha had chronic back pain. I'm not glad that he did, in some respects. I'm not delighting in the fact that the master experienced pain, but as an example, as a sort of spiritual exemplar for us, then we should be able. It's a good example that we can age, we can experience weakness, disability, sickness, and for it not to be a problem. It doesn't mean that we don't seek treatment or take medicine or do exercises and look after it. We do the best we can with it, but the main thing is, in this moment, the mind does not make a problem out of it. It does not create it as something that shouldn't be. So there's a lack of personalizing around it. It's appreciated exactly as it is, as a pattern of experience, as a facet of nature that arises, passes away, and does its thing. And so that the second arrow is what we talk about when we talk about the ending of suffering. So even as the body is, say, experiencing a lot of pain, like a couple of days ago, I went to see Steve Saslau, ex-Ajahn Santacito. He's probably got less than 2 weeks to live. He has pancreatic cancer, and so he's very close to the end of his life. I went down to see him at his home in Chichester, and he's very frail, can hardly, can move around very, very slowly. There's a lot of physical pain. But his attitude is really very impressive. That his life is wrapping up. The organs are breaking down. There's no treatment possible. They couldn't put a stent into his bile duct and help his liver to function. So it's the end game. It's running down. But he's not pretending to be an arahant. But it was really impressive, his attitude to meeting and receiving the limitation of movement, the lack of functionality, the physical pain, and just being ready to work with it moment by moment. A wave of feeling by wave of feeling, and just and he would say, "Okay, can we just stop for a moment? This is really uncomfortable." And then you can pause for a bit and say, "Okay." Kind of another wave of energy would come back, or the wave of pain would pass, and say, "Okay, I can engage again." So to me, that was a really wonderful example of pain but not suffering. He's got a really good attitude, and that yes, he's in his early 70s, and yes, he would prefer not to be dying of cancer, but that's what's happening. It's not treatable, and it's the end game. It's the closing down of a life, and that, to be in the presence of that and to try and convince yourself I don't exist. Like, well, it's not a philosophical position, but more an attitude of seeing things in a different way, seeing things in a non-personal way, in a fashion that is not based around I and me and mine, but rather here is the awake mind knowing the flow of the patterns of nature. Like Lumpur Sumedho would put it, it's the Buddha seeing the Dhamma, the awake mind knowing the way things are. And when there is that wakeful awareness, then even if what's being known is painful, there's no suffering around it. One of the main issues in our society today is not so much physical pain and difficulty, but what people do with painful mind states. And just in the break, someone was talking with somebody about how it's often the most comfortable and secure countries that have the highest rate of alcoholism and drug abuse. And the suicide levels are extremely high. Countries like Scandinavia or New Zealand, Switzerland, places that are really safe, really safe, secure, sort of cradle to grave care in the society. That it's not physical pain that's difficult to deal with; it's mental pain. It's the depressive attitudes and self-criticism and negative mind states. That's what becomes really hard to work with. So it's to my mind, and obviously I'm a bit biased, but I would say the more that we can develop that skill of knowing this body, this mind, and these feelings as aspects of nature, the natural world, and respect this body and this life and the lives of others as aspects of the natural world, then we take care of this life in the best way possible, we take care of the lives of others in the best way possible, but we don't take any of it personally, either this or that. It's not seen as a sort of fixed me and you, but it's seen as sort of nature looking after itself. And that the more that the heart is in tune with Dhamma, then the more that, say, what can be done in order to benefit and support this life and the lives of others is done, and what can't be done is let go of, is not made anything of. So that and again, the Buddha's a really, really good example. He did what he could with his life to bring forth explanations and teachings and be an example of a skillful human being, a life skillfully lived, that was both resulted in the ending of suffering for him and the ending of suffering for others, and the illumination of the path to liberation for many others. But he wasn't disappointed that he hadn't brought every being in the world to total arahantship. It was like, darn, I could have done better. It's kind of, I'm just saying the words. It's like, it's weird just saying the words, even though I'm pretending. It's like there's no way that the Buddha could think like that. He did what he did. He planted the seeds he did, and then that's it. You work within the bounds you have, and you do the best you can, and you let go. And speaking of letting go, I see the clock has swung round to the big hand is on the 12 and the little hand is on the 4. So it's time to call things to a close. So thank you for your good attention.